Usually when we talk about military strategy, well, and conventional warfare specifically, there is this comforting expectation of absolute precision. You know what I mean?
Right. It's like a game of chess.
Exactly. It is exactly like a game of chess. You can see every single piece on the board. You know, exactly how the knight moves, you know the range of the rook, and you understand the rules of engagement.
Yeah, it's all very visible.
Right. You deploy an armored division, you track the enemy's mechanized columns on a high-resolution satellite feed, and a commander points to a digital map and basically says, there they are, calculate the trajectory. Engage.
Because it's binary. I mean, it is essentially math and physics at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Force A meets Force B on a defined battlefield.
Yeah.
And, you know, the side with the superior firepower and logistics generally wins the day.
Right.
And we are very comfortable with that because it is measurable.
It's measurable, yes. But then you step into the world of irregular warfare, and specifically the human terrain of resistance movements, and that entire chessboard just gets flipped upside down.
Oh, completely. It's a totally different game.
Right. Half the pieces are completely invisible to your satellites. The board itself keeps changing its dimensions based on political grievances, and the rules are written in a cultural language that you are only just starting to learn.
And that is a huge shock to the system for a lot of people.
It really is.
Yeah.
We're looking at a strategic landscape that is incredibly murky, highly volatile, and entirely dependent on human psychology.
And well, that murky landscape is where some of the most consequential conflicts of the modern era are actually decided.
Yeah.
You cannot solve a political grievance or insurgency with a satellite feed. You just can't. You have to understand the invisible networks operating beneath the surface of a society.
Which is exactly why we are plunging into those strategic muddy waters today. We are taking a deep dive into the source material to unpack one of the most misunderstood, incredibly complex, and absolutely high-stakes concepts in the entire realm of military strategy.
Unconventional warfare.
Unconventional warfare.
Yes.
Yes. So, for you listening, if you have ever felt overwhelmed by military jargon, or if you find yourself confused by how the United States government actually operates in the shadows to influence global events, consider this your ultimate shortcut.
We are definitely stripping away the Hollywood myths today.
Oh, we have to. No rogue operators going off script here. We are looking at the actual foundational doctrine that guides American policymakers and military strategists.
And to do that properly, we have an incredible stack of source material to guide us. I mean, we are not dealing with theory here.
No, not at all.
We are pulling from the foundational texts that actually guide the practitioners on the ground.
So let me lay out what we are working with. We have 5 massive pillars of doctrine and analysis for this deep dive into the source material. First, we are looking at David Maxwell's phenomenal article from the Small Wars Journal titled, "Why Does Special Forces Train and Educate for Unconventional Warfare?"
That one is a classic.
It really is. Second, we have Lieutenant Colonel Mark Grodovich's highly influential A Leader's Handbook to Unconventional Warfare.
Essential reading right there.
Absolutely. Third, we are pulling heavily from Joint Publication 3-05, Joint Doctrine for Special Operations. And specifically, we're focusing on the detailed appendices covering unconventional warfare and support to resistance.
Right, the heavy doctrinal stuff.
The heavy hitters. Fourth, we are utilizing the United States Army Special Operations Command's Unconventional Warfare Pocket Guide. And finally, we are weaving in a fascinating strategic concept document titled How Army Special Operations Forces Fights.
It is a great lineup, and our goal for you today is to define unconventional warfare from multiple intersecting perspectives.
Yes.
We want you to understand not just what it is, but the underlying mechanics of how it actually works, and its precise place within the much larger strategic framework of the United States.
So we need to begin with the bedrock. In the military, doctrine is law, and words matter immensely.
Every single syllable is debated before it gets codified.
Oh, I bet. So I am going to read the exact definition of unconventional warfare straight from the doctrine. I want you to really listen to the specific words chosen here. Ready?
Let's hear it.
Unconventional warfare is defined as activities conducted to enable a resistance movement or insurgency to coerce, disrupt, or overthrow a government, or occupying power by operating through or with an underground auxiliary and guerrilla force in a denied area.
That is a remarkably dense sentence.
It was a lot to unpack.
It is. Let's isolate the very last phrase first because it sets the stage for everything else. in a denied area.
Actually, I was just going to stop you there because the doctrine throws that term around, but what does a denied area actually look like on the ground?
It's a great question.
Because it sounds like a place where you just don't have a cell phone signal or something.
No, it is much, much more severe than that. A denied area is a geographic region where the hostile government or the occupying power has near total control over the security environment.
Okay.
And the United States has essentially zero overt access.
Wow. Zero.
Right. Think of a hostile, authoritarian capital city crawling with secret police, ubiquitous surveillance, and, a massive conventional army.
So no backup?
None.
Yeah.
If an American operator is in a denied area, they have no conventional military backup. There is no quick reaction force waiting in helicopters to save them if a meeting goes bad.
That is terrifying.
There is no diplomatic immunity either. They are completely isolated, operating illegally under the nose of a hostile state apparatus that is actively hunting them.
Which completely reframes the first part of that doctrinal definition for me. The military isn't going into that denied area to fight the hostile government directly.
Exactly.
The definition says the goal is to enable a resistance movement. And when I was reading through the Unconventional Warfare Pocket Guide and David Maxwell's article, a non-military analogy just kept coming to mind.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
It is less like a traditional military invasion and a lot more like acting as venture capitalists.
Oh, I like that. I think that captures the dynamic perfectly. The United States is not the startup in this scenario.
Right. The indigenous population is the startup.
Yeah.
Think about it. When a massive venture capital firm spots a scrappy tech startup that is trying to disrupt a massive monopolistic corporation, the venture capitalists do not go out and build the software themselves.
No, they don't.
They don't fight the monopoly directly. They enable the startup. They provide the seed funding, the expert mentorship, the logistical connections, and the strategic guidance.
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
In unconventional warfare, Washington is essentially the venture capitalist. But instead of funding a tech startup to disrupt a commercial market, the American military is enabling a local insurgency to bankrupt a hostile regime's monopoly on political power.
Precisely. The American operators are not doing the fighting. They are scaling up the indigenous resistance so the locals can do the fighting.
And just like in venture capitalism, you are looking for a return on your investment.
Always.
Yeah.
And in this case, the return is defined by 3 suppressive verbs in our definition: coerce, disrupt, or overthrow.
The big 3.
Right. And what David Maxwell points out in his article is that policymakers, and, well, the public too, often get completely fixated on the word overthrow.
Because that is the Hollywood ending. We immediately think of the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, parachuting behind enemy lines into occupied France to completely dismantle the Nazi regime alongside the French resistance.
Exactly. Overthrowing a government is certainly the most extreme, highest stakes outcome. But Maxwell argues that coercion and disruption are equally vital.
And probably more common. Right?
Far more common strategic options in the modern geopolitical landscape. Let's look at the mechanics of coercion, for example.
Okay, let's do it.
Coercion is about forcing a hostile government or an occupying power to do something it desperately does not want to do.
Yeah.
You aren't trying to destroy the government.
You just want them to change course.
Exactly. You are trying to change its behavior. Suppose a hostile nation is aggressively threatening international shipping lanes.
Right.
By enabling a resistance movement within their borders, you apply enough internal pressure and pain that the hostile government is forced to the negotiating table to change its foreign policy.
So you are basically holding their internal stability hostage to force a change in their external behavior.
That is exactly what it is.
That makes sense. What about disruption then? How is that mechanically different from coercion?
Disruption is about physically or psychologically preventing the adversary from executing their plans.
Oh, okay. Like sabotage?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
If a hostile nation is massing its conventional army to invade a friendly neighbor, and you enable a resistance movement inside the hostile nation's borders, you disrupt their ability to project power.
Because they have to deal with the mess at home.
Right. Suddenly, trains carrying their tanks are mysteriously derailing. Their supply depots are catching fire. Their communication lines are severed.
So they don't necessarily have to be overthrown, but they are completely paralyzed.
Paralyzed is the perfect word. They have to spend all their resources dealing with their own internal security crisis, which means they can no longer invade their neighbor. You have neutralized them as an external threat.
Wow. So if you are the operator, the venture capitalist on the ground in that denied area, you have to be able to orchestrate coercion, disruption, or a full overthrow.
You do.
What does that demand of a human being? Because Maxwell includes this incredible quote from former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, who also served as the Director of Central Intelligence.
Well, I know the exact quote you're talking about.
Gates said, if you can do the unconventional warfare missions, you can do all others. He basically calls unconventional warfare the absolute soul of the special operator.
And he is absolutely right. It is the foundational fluency.
Why is that, though?
Think about the sheer mechanical difficulty of the human terrain we just described. If you can infiltrate a denied area completely undetected.
Which is hard enough.
Right. And if you can identify people who are willing to risk their lives to fight a tyrannical government, if you can build their trust across massive cultural and linguistic barriers, if you can organize them into a clandestine network, train them in espionage and sabotage, equip them securely, and lead them in combat without getting compromised.
It's like spinning plates.
It is.
Yeah.
If you can do all of that, you have mastered the absolute pinnacle of irregular warfare.
Because you aren't just a soldier at that point. You are a diplomat, a spy, a psychologist, and a sociologist all rolled into one. You are navigating the most complex human ecosystem imaginable.
And if you possess those foundational skills, doing the exact opposite becomes second nature.
The opposite? What do you mean?
Well, the opposite of unconventional warfare is foreign internal defense.
Okay.
That is when the American military is invited in by a friendly, legitimate government to help them defeat an insurgency.
Oh, I see.
Well, if you already know exactly how an insurgency forms, how it recruits, how it hides in the shadows, and how it sustains itself, because you've built them yourself, you know exactly how to dismantle one.
You have the blueprints.
Exactly. You understand the insurgency's vulnerabilities intimately. That same cultural and psychological fluency translates directly to counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. Unconventional warfare is the masterclass. Everything else is a derivative.
Which leads us to a massive question about the resistance itself, because if you are going to act as that venture capitalist, you have to know exactly who you are investing in.
You definitely do.
You cannot just drop crates of rifles to a random group of angry citizens and expect them to overthrow a police state.
No, that never works.
The doctrine is adamant that a true, viable resistance movement is not a mob. It is a highly structured, compartmentalized ecosystem.
It has a distinct anatomy. And Lieutenant Colonel Mark Gradovich breaks this down with incredible precision in a leader's handbook to unconventional warfare.
Yes, and you see the exact same architecture in the Unconventional Warfare Pocket Guide, too.
Right. For a resistance to survive against a modern security apparatus, it must be built on a triad, a three-part cast of characters.
The underground, the auxiliary, and the guerrilla force.
That is the triad.
Let's take this apart piece by piece, starting with the underground. Because when most people hear resistance, they picture the guerrillas. You know, people running around in the mountains with camouflage and rifles.
Sure, the visible fighters.
But the underground is doing something entirely different.
The guerrillas cannot survive without the underground, period. The underground is the cellular, deeply covert element of the resistance.
Okay.
They operate in the exact environments where guerrillas would be instantly captured or killed, primarily in the dense urban centers, right in the shadow of the adversary's headquarters.
Wow.
They are the invisible nervous system. Their primary functions are intelligence gathering, running the subversion campaigns, executing highly targeted sabotage, and conducting psychological operations against the regime.
And mechanically, how do they stay alive? I mean, if they are operating in the capital city, surrounded by secret police, how do they not get rounded up in a single night of raids?
Through ruthless compartmentalization.
Well, you know, exactly.
Meaning the underground is not a social club where everyone knows each other. It is built in isolated cells. Cell A might be responsible for gathering intelligence on police patrols. Cell B might be responsible for printing anti-government propaganda.
Okay.
The members of Cell A do not know the names, faces, or locations of the members of Cell B.
Wait, really? They don't know each other at all?
Not at all. If they need to communicate, they do not text or call. They use a cutout, a third party who doesn't know the full identity of either cell, or they use dead drops.
Like leaving a coded message behind a loose brick in a public park.
Exactly like that. The mechanics of this tradecraft ensure that if one cell is compromised, interrogated, or even tortured by the secret police, they literally cannot betray the rest of the network because they simply don't know who the network is.
That is fascinating. It's built to fail safely in a grim sort of way. So the underground is the intelligence and subversion wing. Then you have the second part of the triad, the auxiliary.
The auxiliary.
And honestly, reading through these sources, the auxiliary seems like the absolute unsung hero of the entire war.
They bear an astronomical amount of risk. The auxiliary is the clandestine support network. What makes them unique is that the members of the auxiliary do not leave their daily lives to go hide in a bunker.
Right.
They are the baker, the school teacher, the mechanic, the hospital nurse. They blend perfectly into the normal, everyday population.
They just go to work like normal.
Exactly. They pay their taxes to the hostile government during the day. But behind the scenes, they are the logistical lifeblood of the resistance.
Wait, you're telling me we just expect a baker or a mechanic to run a covert logistics network? How does that actually work in practice without them getting caught immediately?
It works precisely because of their mundane cover. The mechanic is officially repairing trucks for the local population, but he is secretly skimming spare parts or building hidden compartments into civilian vehicles to transport weapons.
Oh, wow.
The baker is ordering massive amounts of flour, but using those shipments to smuggle medical supplies or ammunition to the underground.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The auxiliary provides the safe houses, they forge the identity documents, they pass the messages, and they vet new recruits. Without the auxiliary, the underground cannot move, and the guerrilla force starves in the mountains.
Which brings us to the guerrilla force itself. These are the overt, militarized fighters. They're the ones conducting the actual armed conflict, the ambushes, the raids on supply convoys, the kinetic attacks that bleed the enemy's conventional forces.
The tip of the spear.
Right. But, reading through Grudovik's handbook, I hit a massive conceptual wall. It prompted a really practical, almost terrifying question in my mind. Let's say this triad operates perfectly. The venture capital investment pays off, the resistance wins the war, the hostile regime completely collapses, and the dictator flees the country.
Okay, the ideal scenario.
Right. But who actually steps up to run the country the next morning? You can't just have a 20-something guerrilla squad leader suddenly trying to manage a national economy, stabilize a currency, and run a healthcare system.
You absolutely cannot. And that is the exact trap that has doomed countless historical revolutions.
Right, because then what happens?
You win the war, but you lose the peace, and the country immediately devolves into a catastrophic civil war as different guerrilla factions fight for control over the vacuum.
Which defeats the whole purpose.
Exactly. The doctrine anticipates this threat.
Yeah.
This is why you must have a political framework ready before the regime ever falls. We are talking about two crucial concepts here: the shadow government and the government in exile.
Let's look at the shadow government first. How does a shadow government actually function while a war is going on?
The shadow government is a clandestine political and administrative structure that usually grows directly out of the underground.
Okay.
While the guerrillas are blowing up bridges and the auxiliary is smuggling food, the shadow government is quietly providing alternative governance to the population.
What does that mean mechanically, though?
Mechanically, it means they are setting up secret schools to educate children when the state schools are pushing propaganda. They are organizing clandestine medical clinics. They might even set up informal courts to resolve civil disputes among the population, bypassing the corrupt regime's justice system.
Oh, wow. So they are functioning like a real government.
They are. They might even collect a voluntary shadow tax to fund the resistance.
So they are essentially proving to the civilian population in real time that they can govern more effectively and fairly than the tyrant they are fighting.
Precisely. They are building functional, undeniable legitimacy. So when the regime finally falls, the shadow government steps out of the darkness and into the light.
They just take over.
They fill the power vacuum immediately, preventing chaos, because they already have an administrative structure in place.
And what about the other option, the government in exile?
Alternatively, you might have a government in exile. This is a recognized, legitimate political authority. Perhaps the democratically elected leaders who were displaced when an occupying power invaded.
Right, so they are not in the country anymore.
No, they are operating from a safe haven in a neighboring, friendly country. They coordinate the strategic political messaging and secure international diplomatic recognition while the resistance fights on the ground inside the country.
It is a phenomenal holistic structure, and Grudevik ties this entire ecosystem together by explaining that unconventional warfare succeeds through the synchronized effects of two distinct lines of operation.
The 1-2 punch.
Exactly. It's a 1-2 punch. You have armed conflict and you have subversion. Armed conflict is mostly executed by the guerrilla force. And its purpose is physical, right? To bleed and degrade the state's security apparatus.
Yes.
At the second line, subversion, driven primarily by the underground, seems to be the real center of gravity here.
Subversion is absolutely the more powerful of the two, and the doctrine emphasizes this heavily.
Why is that?
Because subversion is psychological warfare. It is the deliberate, systematic undermining of the government's legitimacy in the eyes of the population, and crucially, in the eyes of the government's own military and police forces.
Oh, that makes sense.
You can destroy 100 enemy tanks with armed conflict, but the regime can always build more tanks.
Right.
However, if you use subversion to convince the population that the regime is corrupt, illegal, and inevitably doomed to fail, well, the regime crumbles.
It rots from the inside.
Even more effectively, if you subvert the minds of the adversary's soldiers, they stop following orders, they desert, they refuse to fire on the protesters. You have to win the physical fight with the guerrillas, but you must win the moral and cognitive fight with the underground. A regime collapses from the inside out when its own enforcers no longer believe in its legitimacy.
So if we have this incredibly complex triad built, the underground, the auxiliary, the guerrillas, and the shadow government, how do American policymakers actually decide to use it? Do they just flip a switch and instantly start a full-blown war? How does this fit into the broader grand strategy?
They absolutely do not just flip a switch. If we look at Joint Publication 3-05, the overarching doctrine for special operations, they introduce a broader umbrella term that encompasses unconventional warfare.
Okay, what is it?
That term is Supportto Resistance.
Supportto Resistance.
Right. Supportto Resistance describes all the integrated, comprehensive activities the United States undertakes to support a foreign population that is resisting external subversion, resisting an aggressive neighbor, or fighting an occupying power.
So unconventional warfare is just one part of that.
Exactly. Unconventional warfare is the sharpest tool under that broader umbrella.
And within that doctrine, they outline what they call the resistance continuum. And I found this to be a brilliant framework because it shows that a resistance movement is an evolution.
It is very fluid.
Yeah, it is not binary. It moves through phases of intensity.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that continuum. It starts at the absolute lowest level of intensity with nonviolent legal actions.
Okay.
These are your standard, socially accepted forms of resistance. It is citizens signing petitions, organizing legal political opposition parties, or participating in permitted protests.
Things we see all the time.
Right. They are operating within the legal framework of that specific society to voice their grievances. But when the state ignores those grievances, or worse, responds with violent crackdowns, the resistance is forced to escalate.
Naturally.
They move to nonviolent illegal actions.
So this is where they start breaking the law, but they aren't using lethal force yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are talking about massive civil disobedience.
Yeah.
Think of the Solidarity movement in Poland during the Cold War.
Oh, right.
It is illegal labor strikes that paralyzed the national economy.
Right.
It is the purposeful, coordinated disruption of state administrative functions. It is citizens refusing to pay taxes en masse. It is illegal. It is highly disruptive, but it stops short of armed violence.
But if the tyrant refuses to yield or, starts massacring the protesters, the continuum crosses a massive threshold.
It does. It moves into rebellion.
Rebellion. And this is characterized by disorganized, spontaneous violence. It is riots in the streets, mobs burning down police stations, people throwing Molotov cocktails. It is chaotic.
Very chaotic.
If that chaos manages to organize itself, it solidifies into an insurgency. An insurgency is structured, sustained subversion and violence seeking a specific political change.
Yes.
And finally, if the insurgency grows massive enough, you reach the highest level of the continuum, which is belligerency. At this stage, the resistance movement essentially resembles a conventional army fighting a full-scale civil war, holding significant territory and operating with conventional military tactics.
Now, what is strategically vital for you to understand is that Washington does not have to wait for a full-blown belligerency or insurgency to get involved.
But they don't.
No. Under the umbrella of Supportto Resistance, American policymakers can choose to intervene and support a movement at any point along that continuum, strictly depending on what the strategic objectives are.
The analogy that came to my mind while reading this is, well, it's like a pressure cooker.
Pressure cooker, okay.
Yeah, the hostile regime is the food inside, and the indigenous resistance movement is the heat. The United States, acting from the outside as the venture capitalist, has their hand resting on the dial.
I love that.
Depending on the grand strategy, Washington can choose to turn the heat up or turn it down.
Right.
If the goal is simply to coerce the regime into stopping a nuclear weapons program, maybe American intelligence only provides secure communications and funding to support nonviolent illegal labor strikes. They keep the heat on medium to apply economic pain.
Just enough pressure.
Exactly. But if the goal is to completely overthrow a hostile occupying power that has invaded an ally, Washington turns the dial all the way up, deploying operators to support the transition to full insurgency and belligerency.
That pressure cooker visual is highly accurate. And the strategic document, How Army Special Operations Forces Fights, explains exactly why American strategists want their hand on that dial.
Why is that?
Because unconventional warfare is rarely the decisive, solitary action that wins a massive war all by itself. It is almost always a supporting line of effort. But its true strategic power lies in its unique ability to impose what the doctrine calls outsized costs on adversaries.
Outsized costs. We are back to the venture capital idea, right? A massive return on a relatively small investment.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of those outsized costs. By infiltrating a very small footprint of highly trained operators to enable a massive indigenous resistance, you create incredibly complex strategic dilemmas for the enemy.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine an adversary nation, a massive authoritarian power that is massing its tank divisions on its border, preparing to invade a smaller, friendly nation.
Okay, setting the stage.
In response, Washington turns the dial on the pressure cooker. Suddenly, an insurgency erupts deep within the authoritarian power's own borders. The underground is assassinating key political leaders in the capital.
Wow.
The auxiliary is fomenting massive labor strikes that halt ammunition production. The guerrilla force is blowing up the very rail lines needed to transport those tanks to the border.
The adversary is completely paralyzed.
They are trapped in a dilemma. They are forced to look inward. They have to pull those tank divisions away from the border and redirect their entire military apparatus to focus on their own internal security and survival.
Because they're bleeding from the inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can no longer project power outward. For the cost of a few dozen American operators, some encrypted radios, and specialized training, you have completely neutralized an adversary's massive conventional army. That is the definition of an outsized cost.
It is brilliant strategic leverage. But building that pressure cooker, managing that dial, getting a resistance movement from a handful of angry citizens to a fully functioning guerrilla army with an underground intelligence network, that does not happen overnight.
Oh, absolutely not. It takes years.
Right. How does the military actually execute this? Because reading this doctrine, it feels like trying to build a skyscraper in the dark using a foreign language while the police are actively trying to shoot you.
That is a very fair assessment.
Yes.
It is, without exaggeration, one of the most complex, drawn-out military operations imaginable.
I can imagine.
And to manage that extreme complexity and mitigate the risks, the doctrine, specifically the Unconventional Warfare Pocket Guide and Joint Publication 3-05, breaks the execution down into a highly methodical 7-phase campaign.
The 7 phases.
Yes. This is the blueprint for building a secret army.
Let's walk through the mechanics of those 7 phases, because it actually starts long before a crisis even makes the evening news, right? It starts at phase 0.
Yes, phase 0 is called steady state, or preparation of the environment.
What does that entail?
This phase is happening constantly all around the world during absolute peacetime.
Wait, really? Just constantly?
Constantly. This is where American operators, working closely with the intelligence community and diplomatic personnel, are exhaustively studying the human terrain of potential flashpoints.
Okay.
They are mapping out the political grievances of populations living under authoritarian regimes. They are learning the obscure dialects. They are understanding the deep historical fault lines between different ethnic groups. They are identifying key societal influencers.
They're doing their homework.
Exactly. You have to map the environment deeply before a crisis ever begins. If you don't do phase 0, you will never know if a resistance movement is even viable, let alone who to trust.
Okay, so the geopolitical landscape shifts. The authoritarian regime invades an ally, and Washington decides they need to act. That triggers phase 1, preparation, and phase 2, initial contact. What is actually happening in the corridors of power here?
In phase 1, preparation, the highest levels of the American government are assessing the absolute feasibility and the political risks of the operation.
So the president is involved here.
Oh, heavily. The president and the National Security Council have to ask hard questions. Do the potential resistance leaders actually share our long-term objectives, or are they just using us for weapons?
That's a huge risk.
Right. Is the indigenous population psychologically prepared to endure the brutal retaliation that the regime will inevitably inflict upon them once the resistance starts fighting?
Because the regime will strike back hard.
They always do. Phase 1 is a massive intelligence and psychological preparation phase. If the president gives the green light, you move to Phase 2, initial contact.
And what happens in Phase 2?
This is where American representatives, often from the Central Intelligence Agency or covert diplomatic channels, make that very first, incredibly sensitive contact with the resistance leadership or a recognized government in exile.
Just a quiet meeting somewhere.
Exactly. They meet in secret to negotiate the terms. What will the American support actually look like? What are the boundaries?
And if an agreement is struck, we hit Phase 3, infiltration. Now, this is the phase that movies love to focus on, you know, the halo jumps in the dead of night.
Right, the action movie stuff.
Yeah, but looking at the doctrine, the reality of Phase 3 is much less about action hero shootouts and much more about profound vulnerability.
It is the most fragile moment of the entire campaign.
Really?
Yes. A small pilot team of special operators infiltrates the denied area. They might parachute in, they might smuggle themselves across a porous border, or they might enter under civilian cover using falsified passports. But once they link up with the resistance, their immediate job is absolutely not to start shooting at the enemy. Their job is simply to survive and conduct a massive reality check.
A reality check?
Yes, they have to build rapport with the local guerrilla commanders, which requires immense cultural tact. And they have to conduct a brutal assessment. Does this resistance actually have the thousands of fighters they claim to have during the Phase 2 meetings?
Ah, so verifying the claims.
Exactly. Are their weapons functional? Is their morale real? If the pilot team realizes the resistance is incompetent or compromised, they have to abort the mission.
But if the pilot team gives the green light, they call it in, and we roll into Phase 4, organization. This is where the venture capital analogy really takes off. This is the seed funding and infrastructure phase.
Exactly. In Phase 4, the operators shift from assessors to advisors and architects. They begin organizing that triad we discussed.
The underground, auxiliary, and guerrillas.
Right. They are teaching the underground how to properly compartmentalize their cells and use secure communication protocols. They are working with the auxiliary to set up clandestine logistics networks, finding the hidden valleys where cargo planes can drop weapons at night without the enemy radar seeing them.
Wow.
They are caching weapons, medical supplies, and explosives. They are establishing secure training camps deep in the mountains or forests to teach the guerrillas advanced combat tactics. They are building the skeleton of the secret army.
And once that skeleton is built and the muscles are attached, you hit the gas pedal. Phase 5 is buildup, and Phase 6 is employment. Walk us through the escalation here.
In Phase 5 buildup, the resistance network expands rapidly. The shadow government starts actively recruiting. The auxiliary begins moving massive amounts of smuggled supplies.
Keep gaining momentum.
Exactly. The guerrillas begin conducting limited hit-and-run combat operations, maybe ambushing an isolated police checkpoint. The goal here is not to win the war yet. The goal is to test their training, test the logistics networks, and give the guerrillas confidence.
Like a dress rehearsal.
Yes. Then you reach Phase 6, employment. This is the main event. This is the D-Day scenario.
When you say D-Day, you literally mean the historical D-Day, right? The Jedburgh teams.
Precisely. Before conventional Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, teams of operators parachuted in to link up with the French resistance. Phase 6 is where you synchronize massive, widespread operations.
So no more hit and run.
No. The guerrilla force is no longer doing hit and run. They are actively interdicting major enemy supply lines, blowing up train depots, and actively taking and holding territory.
And what about the underground during all this?
Simultaneously, the underground is launching massive psychological subversion campaigns, flooding the cities with propaganda to completely delegitimize the adversary. The hostile regime is being battered physically from the outside and psychologically from the inside.
Which finally brings us to Phase 7, transition. And I have to push back hard on this one because looking at the doctrine, Phase 7 sounds like a complete nightmare.
Oh, it is.
I mean, let's look at what you just built. You spent years in the shadows secretly arming, funding, and training a massive force of irregular fighters. You taught them how to assassinate political leaders, how to blow up infrastructure, how to live outside the law, and how to violently destroy a regime.
Yes, all of that.
And now, in Phase 7, the hostile government has collapsed. The dictator is gone. And you are asking these hardened guerrilla fighters to just put down their rifles, magically revert to a peaceful civilian society, and become a stable government.
It's a huge ask.
Bringing back our analogy, this is the initial public offering phase. The startup killed the monopoly, and now they have to prove to the public they can run a legitimate, boring, stable company. Shifting them from destroying a regime to becoming one seems like the most dangerous part of the entire campaign.
You have correctly identified the point of maximum strategic peril. The doctrine explicitly acknowledges that Phase 7 is where campaigns historically fail, often catastrophic.
I'm not surprised.
The sudden absence of the shared enemy creates a massive power vacuum. If you don't manage this perfectly, the resistance splinters. Different guerrilla commanders, who now have heavily armed militias, start fighting each other for control of the capital city, and you plunge the country into a devastating civil war.
So how do American planners mitigate that? You can't just tell the operators to stay there forever as a police force.
No, you can't. You mitigate it by recognizing that Phase 7 requires a massive whole-of-government approach. You cannot leave the transition solely to the special operators on the ground.
Who else comes in?
As the regime falls, you need the State Department heavily involved to secure international recognition for the new government. You need civil affairs experts to help the shadow government transition into a functional state authority that can turn the electricity back on and provide clean water immediately.
So they see immediate results.
Right. Most importantly, you need a rigorous plan to demobilize the guerrilla force. You have to integrate those fighters into a new, legitimate national army or police force, and you have to provide economic opportunities for the ones who want to return to civilian life.
Because if they don't have jobs, they just go back to fighting.
Exactly. If you fail Phase 7, the entire unconventional warfare campaign was a strategic failure, regardless of how brilliantly the guerrillas fought in Phase 6.
Okay, if the risks are that astronomical, if Phase 7 is a powder keg of potential civil war, and the political fallout of getting an American pilot team captured during Phase 3 is a massive international incident, it brings me to the ultimate so what question.
Let's hear it.
Why take on all this risk? Why would Washington bother with the messy, volatile, unpredictable business of unconventional warfare? If an adversary is threatening our interests, why not just rely on the sheer, overwhelming, predictable power of the conventional American military? Just send in the aircraft carriers, the stealth bombers, and the armored divisions.
That is the core strategic dilemma that policymakers face every day. And Mark Gerdevik addresses this beautifully in his handbook by splitting the application of unconventional warfare into two distinct strategic scenarios: general war versus limited war.
Okay.
The utility of the doctrine changes entirely depending on which scenario you are in.
Let's explore general war first. How does this fit into a massive global conflict?
In a general war, you actually are using the aircraft carriers and the armored divisions.
Yep.
The United States is engaged in a massive, overt conventional conflict for national survival. Think of World War II.
Right.
In that scenario, unconventional warfare is purely supporting effort. The operators are sent behind enemy lines to organize resistance groups, again like the French resistance or the partisans in the Philippines, to wreak absolute havoc on the enemy's rear areas.
Oh, I see.
They blow up the bridges leading to the front lines, they cut the telegraph wires, they ambush reinforcement convoys, they paralyze the enemy from the inside, making the conventional military's job of smashing through the front door much easier.
But the world doesn't fight many general wars anymore, so how does limited war change the equation?
It changes everything. In a limited war scenario, Washington does not want to, or simply cannot, commit massive conventional troops.
Why not?
Maybe it is too politically sensitive. Maybe deploying conventional troops would cross a red line and trigger a catastrophic nuclear exchange with a rival superpower. Or maybe the American public simply has no appetite for a massive, bloody troop deployment.
All very real possibilities.
In a limited war, the objectives of the unconventional warfare campaign take on a purely strategic, political, and psychological nature. You use unconventional warfare as the primary tool to degrade, coerce, or overthrow an adversary without ever overtly committing the bulk of your conventional military power.
That's a huge advantage.
It provides the president with a vital array of options between doing absolutely nothing and starting World War III.
It is the ultimate asymmetric tool. You fight the war without technically fighting the war. And there is a concept from David Maxwell's article that really blew my mind regarding how we conceptualize this tool and its broader utility. He calls it the mirror effect.
Ah, the mirror effect. It's a profound conceptualization of irregular warfare as a complete discipline. Maxwell explains that irregular warfare is essentially a coin with two sides. Unconventional warfare is the offensive side of the coin.
Meaning what?
Washington is acting on the offensive, infiltrating a denied area to support an insurgency against a hostile, occupying power. The American operators are the ones trying to tear down the established order and subvert the regime.
And the defensive side of the coin?
The defensive sides are foreign internal defense and counterinsurgency. This is where American forces are invited in by a friendly, legitimate allied government to help them defeat an insurgency that is trying to tear them down.
Right, we touched on this earlier.
We did. And what the mirror effect reveals is that the underlying mechanics of the human terrain are exactly the same, just viewed from opposite sides of the looking glass.
That's a great way to put it.
If you intimately understand how a hostile underground uses compartmentalized cells to subvert a government, you know exactly how to train a friendly government's police force to hunt down and dismantle those cells.
Because you've built them before.
Exactly. If you know how an auxiliary smuggles weapons through civilian infrastructure to supply a guerrilla force, you know exactly how to sever the logistics networks of a terrorist organization. Offensive unconventional warfare teaches you the exact anatomy of the threat, making you the ultimate expert in defending against it.
And Gradovic drives home the point that you absolutely cannot skip steps in mastering this anatomy. The doctrine is written in blood and failure. He brings up the historical lessons of the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba to prove what happens when you ignore the phases.
The Bay of Pigs is the ultimate textbook cautionary tale of failed unconventional warfare.
Why did it fail so badly?
It failed because the planners fundamentally misunderstood the doctrine we just discussed. They essentially tried to skip phases 0, 1, 4, and 5 and jump straight to phase 6, employment.
Oh, wow. They just skipped right to the end.
They thought they could just train a proxy force of exiles in a foreign country, land them on a beach in Cuba, and the regime would magically collapse because they assumed the Cuban people would spontaneously rise up in rebellion.
But there was no triad.
Exactly. Grudovic points out the hard lessons learned. You cannot succeed without that clandestine infrastructure already in place. The planners failed to build an underground and an auxiliary inside Cuba prior to the invasion.
So they were blind.
Completely blind. When the proxy force landed on the beach, there was no internal intelligence network to guide them, no logistical network to supply them, and no subversion campaign to undermine the regime's military. The regime's military simply drove to the beach and crushed them.
You cannot just import a revolution from the outside and expect it to survive.
You cannot. Furthermore, the operational security was non-existent, meaning they lost the element of surprise. But perhaps the most vital lesson of the Bay of Pigs is about the cognitive terrain.
How so?
The planners assumed the physical act of an invasion would trigger a psychological collapse of the regime. They were wrong. When you are dealing with a population, the psychological subversion, the painstaking work of the underground convincing the people that the regime must fall, is often far more important than the physical guerrilla warfare.
So the minds of the people.
Yes. You cannot win the physical terrain on the beach if you have not already won the cognitive terrain in the minds of the population.
That is a profound point, and it perfectly encapsulates why this doctrine is so incredibly complex. We have covered an immense amount of ground today on this deep dive into the source material.
We really have.
Let's summarize the core journey for you, our listener. We started by dismantling the myth that unconventional warfare is just about handing out rifles to rebels in the woods. We discovered that it is a highly structured, incredibly methodical, 7-phase strategic option.
That takes years to develop.
Yes, years. Its purpose is to coerce, disrupt, or overthrow hostile powers, and it accomplishes this by working entirely through the complex living ecosystem of indigenous resistance, the triad of the underground, the auxiliary, and the guerrilla force.
Right.
By operating in the shadows of a denied area, it allows American strategists to impose outsized costs on adversaries, creating paralyzing strategic dilemmas without having to commit massive conventional armies.
It truly is the soul of the special operator. It provides the foundational fluency in the murky, volatile human terrain that makes all other irregular warfare missions, from counterinsurgency to counterterrorism, possible.
Meep, before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought, something for you to mull over that builds on everything we have discussed but points toward the future. In David Maxwell's article, he observed something fascinating about how the geopolitical landscape of the modern world is rapidly changing. He notes that the traditional legal definition of an occupying power is blurring.
This is where the historical doctrine collides with the future of warfare. Historically, an occupying power was a recognized nation-state sending its conventional army across a border to conquer another nation-state.
Like in World War II.
Exactly. But today, we are increasingly seeing non-state actors extremist networks, and violent proxy groups acting essentially as pseudo-states. They are crossing borders, seizing massive swaths of territory, subjugating local populations, and setting up their own brutal forms of governance, taxation, and law.
They're acting like governments.
They are. Think of violent extremist organizations holding territory in the Middle East or across parts of Africa. They're acting exactly like occupying powers, even though they aren't recognized nations.
And here is the provocative thought for you to consider. If these non-state actors, these terrorist pseudo-states, are the new occupying powers, then unconventional warfare isn't just a Cold War relic for fighting rival nations.
No, it's not.
It might be the exact, precise blueprint needed to dismantle the world's most dangerous terrorist and proxy networks from the inside out.
Consider the mechanics of that for a moment. Instead of sending conventional American forces to clear a city block by block that is held by a massive terrorist network, which is incredibly costly in blood and treasure, what if the strategy is to apply the 7 phases of unconventional warfare?
Turn the tables on them.
Exactly. What if operators infiltrate to enable the oppressed local population? You help them organize a clandestine underground to gather intelligence on the terrorist leaders. You help them build an auxiliary to smuggle weapons past the terrorist checkpoints. You train a local guerrilla force to rise up and overthrow the extremists from within their own caliphate.
Wow.
Consider how the entire future of warfare and counterterrorism might look when the state we are trying to overthrow isn't a recognized state at all, but a terror network holding a population hostage.
It completely reframes how we think about modern conflict and the power of indigenous resistance. Suddenly, that murky, complex, invisible chessboard we talked about at the very beginning isn't just a puzzle. It is the primary battleground of the 21st century.
It absolutely is.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this exploration has given you a much clearer, more precise lens through which to view global events and the hidden strategies actively shaping our world. Keep questioning the evolving nature of strategy, look past the conventional headlines, and remember that sometimes the most decisive and devastating moves on the global chessboard are the ones you will never see on a satellite feed. Until next time.